Okay guys, welcome back. We are in our next video here and we are going to be doing some dynamic simulations, and I kind of want to just show you what we're going to be doing. And here is the video that I came up with for this project. Let's watch it one more time. And as you can see, we've got some nice texture here, and I'm going to show you where I got all of these items here shortly. So what you can see happening here is that we have our main animation, which is our falling of our bullets. We also have the animation of our camera moving backwards, and then the secondary or overlapping animation is the bullets actually interacting with the environment and each other. And so you can see the bullets kind of bouncing off and then moving as they roll. So let's get out of here. Okay guys, here we are inside of our next Cinema 4D scene. This is going to be our dynamic simulation scene. I have a scene kind of already set up for you guys here. As you can see, we have our Deathstroke mask here. We have our two revolvers that are just the same revolver, just copied over. And then the second revolver, basically what I did was change the scale in Z so that it could be symmetrical on the other side. And then I also have my little ground plane here where everything is sitting. And I also have my bullets here. They're sitting right here. And if you look up here above everything, and you'll see why this is here, I have this little cone here. And let me show you kind of how I made that. Basically what I did is I came up here, I created a cylinder. Let's move this off to the side so we can just pay attention to it. And then I went into the caps and I turned that off, and I basically, kind of scaled this down a little bit. And then I hit this little button there to make the whole thing editable. And then I went into my edge mode and I selected my edges, double clicked on it, and I hit T on the keyboard to scale, to kind of open it up and kind of create this funnel. And then I also clicked on this one and scaled it down. So that's how I made that little funnel, and you'll understand why I made that as we continue on. So the first thing that we need to do is we actually need to look at the dynamic system inside of Cinema 4D, over the overall dynamic system. And the way we do that is we go into our project settings, or we hit Control D on the keyboard. We go into the dynamic section, and this is where we will actually see everything. Okay, so the first thing we want to look at is the general area. And right now we can see that I have my gravity set to 100. The default for this is, if you reset that to default, is 1000. I think that's way too much for our purposes, so we can just set that to 100 there. Okay, this time scale at 100 is good, and everything else looks pretty good here. Next, we can actually go to the expert tag, and what we're going to do is we are going to change the steps per frame to 20. And what steps per frame are is basically the resolution of your entire dynamic simulation. So this starts out at, let's go back and say ready set to default. That starts out at 5. And you'll notice that when you're doing dynamic simulations, sometimes when objects collide with themselves or other objects, they'll have some funny movements to them. And that's because your steps per frame, the resolution of the animation is too low. Now, one thing I was taught, rule of thumb wise, is that you should never go above 30 on your steps per frame. If you're going above 30 on your steps per frame, something's wrong with your overall dynamic system, and that needs to be fixed. Okay, so with that said, I am going to continue on. The collision margin should be at 0.3. The default to that is 1. What the collision margin is doing is anytime there's a dynamic simulation and one object is colliding with another one, it's trying to figure out exactly how close that object is, the surface of this object is to this one. So that collision margin will actually, tighten it up if it looks like the object is floating above the surface or something like that. So that's where you would mess with that. And we also want to set the scale to 50, and then these are the settings for we don't have anything for the random seed, but all of this stuff is pretty standard. I didn't change any of the rest. So the next thing we want to look at is our visualization. We want to enable that so I can kind of show you guys what's happening in the background in Cinema 4D when you're working with dynamics. So if I grab one of my bullets here, I'm going to look, I'm going to grab both my bullets, and what I'm going to do is I've already placed them into a cloner, and if you look at my cloner, it's going to be in a grid array. So let's go here. There's our cloner. It's in a grid array. We see our bullets here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my bullets. I'm going to right click on them. I'm going to go to simulation tags, and I'm going to go to rigid body. And that's going to place a rigid body tag on all of our bullets there. The first thing we want to do is, if we look at the collisions thing here, we have this thing called shape. So before I actually do anything there, I want to take this down to 5 and 5 right now. We had 35, but we want to take it to 5 and 5 because I just want to demonstrate something for you guys. So now if we go into our dynamics tag here, what we want to do is set this to, if we leave it at automatic and I go, let's go back to frame 0 and then I move forward 1 frame, the visualization is showing us what the dynamic system is going to try to calculate. Now, although this particular object doesn't have a lot of polygons, when I start adding a lot of objects in here, like 35 or something like that, it gets really slow. So we are going to actually use a trick. One way that you can actually make this work without having so many polygons is to model a dummy object, basically a proxy object that has way less polys, and it will you can use that to actually calculate your simulation, bake out the simulation, and then replace that proxy object with the high poly model that you created. That's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is actually telling the system here to look at this object differently. So since this is a fairly cylindrical object that's going in the Y, what we can do is I can say cylinder axis Y. Okay. And let's go back and then go back to the first frame. And now you can see that our bullet is represented by a much lower poly object here, which is going to make our simulation go a lot faster. So now that we saw that, I can actually turn that visualization off, and then we can go back into our cloner. We can go back into the cloner and we can set this back to 35 and 35 so that we have the amount that we need. Okay, so that's ready to go. Let's go to our floor here. And I am going to, this is the width segments of that floor. And I'll show you why I made so many segments. So the first thing I need to do is I need to come into our deformers section, and I am going to add a displacer. And I'm going to put that here. And in the displacer, the strength should be 100, and then we're going to make the height 16. And what I'm going to do is grab the displacement map from a texture that I'm using for the floor, and you'll see that later, which is right here. I'm going to actually copy this. Let me find the depth map, which is here. We're going to use this 8K depth map. I'm going to hit no on that there. And now if you can see here, what's happening is that we can see a representation of what our floor is going to look like with the displacement. If we lower the resolution of the segments of our plane here, it'll actually start to make this really chunky. Now what this is actually going to help us do, it's actually going to help us calculate our simulation and make sure that when the bullets fall, they hit in the correct areas that they need to hit in. So that's going to be very helpful when we're actually running our simulations. But the problem is that when we set this, so if we come into here and I go to Cinema 4D tags, simulation tags, we would set this to a collider body since the bullets are going to be falling and colliding with it. Then we can go to collision. If we set this, we're supposed to set this to static mesh, which is right. If we do that with its displacer on, it's going to make the simulation go really slow. So what we want to do is we want to get our simulation kind of the way that we want it falling, and then we're ready to bake out that simulation. That's when we'll turn on our displacer, which it could take a while for that simulation to bake out. That's when we would turn on our displacer and bake out our simulation so that it would be more accurate. But when we're just going through and kind of building out the simulation, that's not necessary. So the next thing that we're going to do is I'm going to turn off the displacer. We have our collider body on. Okay, so now for our floor, we're going to come into here. We're going to actually change our parameters here. And we're going to set this to static mesh. And then we're gonna come here and we want to turn off the bounce because we don't want our bullets to be bouncing all over the place. And then we want the friction to be 200 and the collision noise to be 5. So with that there, all we have to do is grab this and I can apply that to my helmet and my Colt revolvers. Okay. We also want to apply this to our cylinder, but the cylinder itself is going to have the parameters on this guy is going to, they're going to be a little bit different. Let's get rid of that guy. So my cylinder is here. I'm going to take this dynamics tag. I'm going to put it on the cylinder here. And we're going to change this to the bounce to be 0, but we want the friction to be about 15% because we want these bullets to really slide down and land onto our object. And that looks pretty good. So let me save this. And that looks like that is pretty good. So let's go ahead and hit play on this and see what we get. Okay, and it looks like we have an issue here. Okay, let's try that again. I didn't really see anything wrong, but let's try that again. There we go. And now they fall down and they're falling through the hole, and now they're landing on our helmet there. Cool. I think that looks cool. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into my, I have a camera set up here, but we want to kind of make it work. I have a camera set up here. It's at a 24 focal length, kind of wide there. I'm going to go into the coordinates and I'm going to change the pitch to 90. Oops, minus 90, sorry. Minus 90, not 900. There we go. And then I'm going to move this up. And now we're going to get directly on it. And as you can see, I have my composition helpers here with the grid and the crosshair. And it looks spot on right there, but I think I'm too far out. So I'm just going to move in, and then we're just going to move up to frame that nicely there. And that looks good. So let's see what it looks like when we bake the simulation and we can watch it in real time. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to grab my dynamics tags here. We're going to go into the cache section here and we can see this bake object option here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to save actually just to make sure, and then we're going to bake those two objects and that'll go through and bake that simulation. Okay, so our simulation has finished and let's take a look. I think that looks good. It flows right nicely into the character there. We do have it falling in the eye there, but that's okay. You can notice a little bit of issues where the bullet is kind of going through the gun there. So let me kind of show you what's happening there. Let's go back into our project settings and we're going to hit enable. And you can see what happened is that when I flipped the gun on its z-axis, for some reason it didn't change the direction of the dynamics simulation, and I'm not quite sure how to fix that, but that is not a big deal. These are the troubleshooting issues that you run into when you are actually working with dynamics. You have to go in and kind of keep tweaking those settings to kind of figure out that to get that correct and make sure that it's falling off of the gun correctly. You can see it's kind of falling through some of the parts. Not ideal, but it does work in most of the areas, and that's what we want. So the next thing that I'm going to do is, now that we have that simulation there, I don't really like how the bullets are flying through the camera like that. So instead of actually re-simming or moving the funnel to direct my animation because I like it, I'm going to just move the camera a bit. Let's see if we can kind of just reposition ourselves. Yeah, and that looks nice. So now it's kind of falling over top of the camera as opposed to right through the lens, and I think that looks really nice. Cool, let's save that. The next thing we're going to do is we're going to start to texture our scene. So the first thing we're going to texture is our floor here. Or excuse me, let's texture the helmet first. I think that's a good idea. So I'm going to show you how I do that in Octane. First, we're going to pull a plugin, C4D Octane, and I'm going to pull up the Octane material here. I'm going to open up go to basic, and I'm going to open up my node editor. And this is what the node editor looks like in Octane, if you guys are not familiar. So I have my textures here, and this is the metal rusty texture that I used on the helmet. So what I can do is, I'm just going to move this off screen, and what I'm going to do is let's pull up our node editor, and I'm just going to grab all of the passes that I need that came with the download, and I'm just going to drop those in here from my Windows machine. It takes a second to load them. They are pretty big textures, and there they are. They kind of drop in like that. Let's pull this out. So this is my roughness map. So we can take this, we'll just plug that into our roughness. It looks like this needs to be possibly a glossy texture. So I'm going to take this to glossy. Okay, and then here is our normal map. So we can just place that there. This one is our displacement. So we need to come here, add displacement. Usually in the displacement, I know that this displacement is 8K, and I think I'm going to take it down to like 1. And we're just going to add that in there. Okay. And this should be our albedo, which is another term for our color. And I know on my albedo, I want to desaturate it a little bit. So I just put a color correction node right between my albedo and my final output. And we're just going to pull down the saturation quite a bit. I would say to about right there. Pull out some of that green. Okay, I'm going to move my window off to the side here and apply this texture to our helmet. And you can see that there, and that really mapped nicely. You can see how it kind of flows over the eye there. The next thing we're going to do is texture our bullets, and we're going to use the same method because let's just label this helmet. Let's go ahead and texture our bullets. So I'm going to create new. Oh, actually, now that I think about it, what I ended up doing for that is I use my textures that I bought from Grayscale Gorilla, and let me show you how I actually grab those. I'll open up my live viewer, and here I go to materials, open live DB after you've installed the preset materials, and these are the Grayscale Gorilla textures here. And I just went into the metal section, and then I used the brass and the copper. So let's see here. There's the brass I used, and there's some copper that you can choose from. I'm actually going to pull that off to the side, and that's right here. So here's the shell. So I can just apply that to that one. And then I also want to apply it to the bullet here, but I actually have some texture tags, texture selections. So if I look here, let's get out of our camera, and I'm going to turn off our cloner. Let's go in so we can see it, and yes, that's the one we want. So I'm going to click that, and I'm going to apply that to that, and then lastly I'll apply the copper, so it'll be for the tip. I just need to put that up front. And if we look, now we have the brass casing with the copper tip. Okay, so we can turn back on our cloner. Now what we want to do is texture our gun. So I'm going to create a shader, plugins, Octane material, and bring this back over here. Let me kind of scale out a little bit. And the gun is fairly easy to texture also. So here are all the Here's all the gun textures here. So I'm just gonna move this off to the side, grab the ones I need and drag and drop them like I did the other ones. All right, sweet. So this is our specular. So this actually needs to be a glossy material. And then we can plug this into our specular. We can plug this into our normal. We can plug this into our gloss, which would be our roughness. And then we can plug this into our diffuse. And that's that. And we can apply that. What is this? This is our bullets. And this is the gun. And we can apply that to the gun. For both guns, actually. Now, I personally did not like the PBR material for the Colts here. When I rendered it, it didn't look very natural. So what I ended up doing is creating some selection sets on the gun by, selecting those polygons and then, going Shift C and then doing set selection, which is right here. Let's close out of that. And so I also grabbed a gunmetal material from Grayscale Gorilla and I just placed that there. And then, put in the corresponding polygon selections to get a more realistic gun texture. Now we can actually do this texture, but I kind of want to show you guys something, and it's pretty cool. So where I got this ground texture is from a site called Real Displacement Textures, and this is like one of the best sites for, very high resolution 3D scanned textures and things of that sort. And this is where I got that particular texture. CG Trader is where I got the helmet, as you can see right here. This is the Deathstroke helmet I was telling you about. Here's the bullets casing set that I bought. I didn't add in all these bullets. I kind of wanted to add in the shotgun shells for some color, but I decided not to do that. And then this is the gun here, which is actually free. So the cool thing about Real Displacement Textures is if I go to File, Open, and I am going to navigate to my textures for this project. Real Displacement Textures actually provide a project file for you based on your render engine. And it has a Cinema 4D file. It also has an Octane file, and it also has a V-Ray file, and it's already set up for you. So that whole process that I went through to set up the textures for the helmet and stuff like that, you actually don't have to go through when you use these. So I'm just going to open this up, and here's my texture, and it's already ready to go. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to grab this one. I'm going to get Control C, come back here into my main scene, and then I'm going to hit Control V, and I'm just going to drop this onto my plane. Okay, and it looks like the textures didn't, the texture didn't link. So let me use my trusty texture manager. I'm going to select all the textures, and I'm going to edit, and I'm going to go to relink textures. I'm going to come in here, and I'm going to find my project file, which is right here, and then I'm going to go to textures, and here's that one. I'm going to hit OK, and it has relinked all of those. And then I'm going to select these textures, hit edit, relink textures, come down, and I'm going to hit OK. And those are relinked. And then let me, I'm not sure why that didn't relink, but let's try to get the gun texture linked to, which would be in my 3D models, and I'll hit OK. And we should be good now. Let's open this up, cool. All right, so everything's linked. So now what I'm going to do is back out of my scene here so you guys can kind of see the lighting setup I have going on here. So basically what I have here is just a single area light, and in that area light I have a fall off map. And what I did was go to plugins, Cinema 4D Octane, and go to fall off map, and this allows me a little bit more control over the distribution of the light and how it affects the scene. So what I'm going to do is go back into my camera that I have created, and then I'm going to come to my live viewer window, and I am going to dock my live viewer window right here so we can see everything a little bit better. And I'm going to open up my settings so you guys can see what my settings are. So right now I'm using path tracing. I have a max samples of 300. I have a diffuse depth of 8, specular depth of 8, and then we also have a GI clamp of 1. So let's close that, and let's go ahead and fire up our render and see what we get. Okay, and what I need to do is actually scale that down a little bit so we can see the full thing. And as you can see, this is our lighting setup here. It actually looks really nice right off the bat. I didn't really have to do too much because I kind of had it set up for us already. But if we look at the, kind of the way the bullets are flying through the camera, I think that looks really cool and cinematic. I also turned on the motion blur inside of the Octane render engine, or actually you have to put on an object tag on each of the objects that you want to have motion blur on them, and that will add it to it. So if I go to the object tag, come here, click motion blur, and then I go into my camera and then activate motion blur there, I have a shutter of 0.1 there. I can probably turn that up a little bit, but I think it's fine for now. One thing I am noticing is that my bullets are going too much through the floor. So in an Octane displacement, you have this option to go to the mid level and kind of bring that down. Oh, actually I want to bring it up so that we can see more of our bullets there. And that looks a little bit more accurate. Let's change this to 4 or 5. Maybe 4, like 7. And yeah, that looks like those are laying on the surface there. So yeah, guys, that is the basic workshop for the dynamics animation. As you can see, we have a really nice scene here, minus motion blur. You do see some issues here where the bullet is actually falling through the floor, kind of falling through the gun here also. So those are going to be those dynamic issues that I was telling you about, how this gun over here is flipped this way. So as a technical artist, also a motion designer, like I said, nothing in motion design is easy. I would have to go through and technically figure out what is going on here and how to make that work. Maybe find a solve of, creating a proxy object for the gun itself so that, it will interact with the dynamics properly. Another thing too is the motion blur. That is a render issue, so that's something that I'll figure out at another time. But with that said, guys, I really hope you kind of enjoyed our overall workshop, starting from learning the user interface inside of Cinema 4D, what a lot of these parameters and stuff mean and how to use them. Also the lighting and texturing course that came right before this one, and hopefully you got something out of this animation course too. So with that said, guys, I really appreciate you watching. You guys take care, and I can't wait to create another video for you guys in the future. All right, take care.